the problem with the revival in my life and in my church was I'm the one that wasn't ready. The people followed. It was easy, but I wasn't ready, and I had to go through what I think it was the valley of the shadow of death. And I'm the leader. I'm the one that needed to change and step into a new realm. And when I did, it was easy. They asked me, why are we not having revival at our church? Now, it's oversimplifying it, but it's easy to say. You know why? Because you don't want it. If that's all you want, you'll get it.
Well, welcome to the Eyes on Jesus podcast with Drew and Tim. We're here with you today with a special guest, Steve Gray. Steve is a 3-time Emmy Award-winning writer, songwriter, and recording artist. He's also a pastor who led the historic Smithton Outpouring and Kansas City Revival. He's the founding pastor of Revive Church of Kansas City. He's been married to Kathy for over 50 years. He's also a proud father and grandfather, and his new book is out now, Mighty Like Gideon. Pastor Steve, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm great, and thank you for having me. It's always good to meet like-minded people that are going after the same goal and encouraging one another to keep going.
Yeah, we love having stories on here. This is all about keeping our eyes on Jesus and hearing from people who've gone through some things, seen some things, and we can learn from it. And we're excited to learn more about you. And if anything off the bat you'd like to add to your bio to help us know more about you, go ahead.
I've obviously did it throw in there. I also made a movie that was on Amazon. Was that? I don't know. That's 10 years ago, but I don't know. The unique thing about it is I watched some of the Christian films back then, at least, and I never recognized anybody in them. I'm not being critical. I understand it that sometimes the budget was lower, but I decided I wanted to use Hollywood people. So I brought them in from Hollywood here, and we filmed it in Kansas City. But so it's called Three Blind Saints, but it doesn't matter. You'd have to dig. It's there, but so I've been busy, and I'm still busy. I'm in songwriting mode this week. So, yeah. And
that's amazing.
And as we were discussing before, if you go back the years before what you mentioned, the Smithton Outpouring, or sometimes it's been called the Cornfield Revival, it was also written about and called Revival in the Middle of Nowhere. In fact, when I went to Japan, I went many times, and there'd be a couple of thousand people show up, and they have such great posters there, and they put posters all over Tokyo, but they got a mistranslation, and there was my big picture, and it said "The Man from Nowhere." All over Tokyo, but they meant it was supposed to be in the middle of nowhere, but they didn't quite catch that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, isn't that a TV show or something?
The Man from Nowhere. I love it.
And so what we were talking before we went on to this, and that the interesting thing about it before the Smithton Outpouring, which is it's so amazing. We hear the word revival a lot, but it's impossible to describe that we could have faked this or done this. We did 5 services a week for 3.5 years. That's like 6,000, sir. And I preached every one of them in a town of 532 people. 250, 250,000 people showed up, went through those doors.
Yeah.
You can't create that. Now, the point being is I love the word revival, and I love hearing anytime God kicks up his heels, or the people do, the excitement of the people. It's great. But I like to just there's no way people would come from all over the world for 3.5 years, pack out, stand in line, come from, like I said, Tokyo or Singapore or Europe or whatever, and it's just a good service.
Yeah.
Or joyful praise. There was something in the air that was so thick that even standing in line, people were getting saved or just committing, or this is an interesting thing too. Hundreds and hundreds of pastors came. And the interesting thing about it, since all 3 of us are pastors, is one of the number one things pastors said to me in that atmosphere is they'd walk away saying, "Pastor Steve, I don't even know if I'm saved." Wow. Now, I didn't question their salvation, but I know what they mean. They saw the children. There were children there. All our kids went. All my kids went, didn't miss a service. And kids gave up. I guess they quit playing soccer. And I got one of the questions they asked, a reporter asked one of the people in there, says, how is it they had 6 kids. And they said, how is it that you attend all these services, all these years with everything else going on? And they said, it's very simple. He said, how could it be simple? He said, you don't do anything else. And wasn't that the early church? You get the feeling they met every day and they didn't do anything else. And I think I read a little bit about you guys too, pastors, and your focus. And isn't that kind of what we need to do as leaders? We need to help people shave off the edges a little bit to where they realize we don't really need to be doing anything else. If we really, we need to go back to the roots of Christianity, where people were, these words we don't hear much anymore, like commitment, loyalty, sacrifice, serving. And those are hard as pastors, it's hard now to get those committed things. So anyway, it was an amazing time and it changed my life. But the interesting thing that I want to do to encourage people leading up to it, I thought maybe God was finished with me. And imagine that in my brain, and then to start hearing from heaven, I want you to have a revival. Well, how did I end up in a town of 532 people? Am I out of my mind or what? That's what I thought. But we moved there. We lived in another town 12 miles away, and our house was hit by a F4 tornado. In fact, I was in it. And that's another story, what it feels like.
Wow.
But our house got condemned along with about 500 other houses. And so everybody was scrambling. So I got a call from a friend who said, hey, there's a house out here in this little town called Smithton. It's just being built. It's finished. Nobody's ever lived in it. And you would qualify for some, I don't know, it's a farmer's loan or something. They like to get young couples out there.
Sure.
And so we looked at it and said, well, let's go. At that time, Kathy and I were traveling. That's where some of the recordings you read about, I still do it. And so we had we traveled a Greyhound bus and all that with the family and all that. And so it was a great place, country. We parked the bus. Nobody bothers us. We can go to this little town and kind of rest up, and then we'll go back on the road again. That was the plan. While there, we began to think about revival. I was in Omaha at an Assembly of God church, and we were pulling out and going to Michigan, and a man came running as fast as he could, and you remember cassette tapes? He had a handful of cassette tapes, and we stopped, he pounded on you got to have these, and he handed me this big thing, and they were cassette tapes by Winky Pratney. I didn't know who he was, but he actually did 2 books out of those, but at the time, and it was just called Revival. And I began to listen as we traveled and heard like Finney and the Welsh Revival. I didn't know any of that. Well, when I was done, I listened to him, I don't know how many times. Kathy and I talked, and she said, Steve, I think revivals are going to start springing up in local churches, and there's going to be a fresh experience. And I said, well, then we're in trouble, because we go, week, 2 weeks, and we're gone. We're not going to get to last. She said, you suppose we should think about pastoring and all that? So in the meantime, we got offered a great position in Chicago at a great church, big church. And they setting us up as associate to maybe take the church over. We'd been there a number of times. And so we accepted. And great pay, great people, loving people, generous people, offered things I hadn't heard of before. I didn't know what a car allowance was, but I liked it.
Yeah, sure.
And, all that stuff. So we accepted, and we started moving that direction. In the meantime, in town of Smithton, the old church is a historical site built in 1859. And it's a great story now, because I found out later that during the Civil War, they'd pull their horses up in time and go in and lay on their faces before God.
Wow.
And we never changed the floor. It was the same floor. But anyway, they came and said, there's a church here. It's been closed for 4 years. It has no people. It needs really cleaning up. There's even some dead animals inside, like birds and skunks and stuff like that. But we can't take care of it. The trustee's too old, and it's going to be torn down. Will you take it and be our pastor? And I got to laugh, like, pastor of what? Of course not. I'm going to Chicago. So that was that.
Right.
They came to me a second time, a few weeks later. Same story, basically. And I said no. Then they came to me a third time. And this time they thought they were making me an offer I couldn't refuse. And they said, here's what we'll do. We'll just give you the thing. To my ministry, but we'll give it to your ministry. It's not great, but it's the corner. It's the church, and got some pews, piano, a little, would you take it? And I said no. Started to leave, and said the old Christian thing. Well, they looked so sad because they thought it was going to be. I said, I'll pray about it, thinking I'm being nice, but there's actually nothing to say to God.
Sure.
Yeah.
But I got home, and I felt a little convicted that I should keep my word at least. So I'll bring it up to God. So I lay out the Chicago church, just like I did to you guys, all the money, all the benefits and all that. And then God, here's a church that has no people, no money. I have no money either now, because I was living off that money, not traveling to seek God. I have no money. It has no money. It has no people. It's locked up. And there you go. And then I said, remember those words, the bands that we used to say? And I said, Jesus, what would you do? Heaven opened, and I heard a voice say, I'll tell you what I would do. I would raise the dead.
Wow.
And there I
Wow.
went. And I lost Chicago. I called, I talked to Kathy. She was in it right away. And I called them and said, I can't come. And they said, what is
Yeah.
it? Do you need more money? Is it money?
Oh,
I said, not exactly. Well, it's money, but it's not yours. So with that in mind, we opened it. We had nothing, no people. I think we got $13 maybe the first service. But I started preaching revival. And I said, I want you to imagine, I don't know where I got this exactly, but I said, I want you to, a lot of times I said, I want you to imagine people lined up around the block and around this building to get in this building, in this, I know it. And they'd clap because it was so,
Yeah, but
like, yes, it was so big, it was easy to applaud.
Yeah.
But anyway, just to get in this building, not because of me, not because of the music, but because the glory and presence of God is here. Well, you know what? That cost me 12 years to get there. And at the end of 12 years in a small town, which gossips and backbites and all that, you know, the church, and by the way, the church was going great for a small town, 150 people in a town that size, pretty good.
Yeah.
You know, it's pretty good. And when we praised, it was pretty good. But I started wearing down and breaking because I couldn't handle people and you guys know, people I'd raised up that said how much they loved me and they loved the church. And then they'd listen to a little jit from people in town. And I could tell they'd changed, but I didn't know why. Nobody ever came and accused me of anything. I didn't know why, but you're just a little different. And then they'd start drifting and then they wouldn't be here anymore. And I go, what is that? And I think it was the small town, like, okay, I could have gone to Chicago. And then when in a church that size, people come in and out and it doesn't hurt. But when you're a town of that size and that size of church, you guys know it's hurtful. And I gave and I started going downhill. And I'm careful what I say, but I'll just say some very special people to me did that. And it was hard. And it was hard for a lot of time. You know, it's just the way it is. Well, anyway, church was going great. They didn't think anything of it. I knew I was going downhill. Kathy noticed it in my preaching. It was just not what it was. I just slowed down in my spirit. I wasn't talking the same to her. I wasn't laughing about anything. I wasn't playing the piano and singing, which I could do, and I didn't do. So Kathy said, you know, you got to do something. And I knew, I thought, you know what? You're right. So on that particular Sunday before the revivals hit, I was in the pulpit there, and this is what I said to him. I said, I am like the woman with the issue of blood. I've been here 12 years. I've spent all that I have.
Wow.
And still, I'm no better. And I walked out.
Wow.
And I thought, God, if you're done with me, I'm okay. I don't have to preach. I don't have to teach. I'm okay with that. And then Kathy, she didn't know what I was going to do. She didn't even know if I was going to stay married. I wasn't. She didn't know. And she then called me on the phone and said, Steve, what do you want? And that's a hard question. And I said, you know, I just want to live again. I want to feel life. I want to laugh. I want to feel life. I want to feel you. I just don't have, and that's really it. But I thought God might be finished. So I went down to Pensacola, which most people know, but I was not a participant. I did not talk to anybody. I went for 2 weeks. I didn't eat. I didn't talk. There was a lot of pastors were there dressed in suits and stuff. And I made sure I wore crummy clothes because I didn't want to be associated. And I sat in the balcony. Now, this is 12 years later after I heard the voice of Raise the Dead and still. So I was sitting in that condition in the balcony in Pensacola in their church. And I heard that same voice again that I hadn't heard for 12 years. And it said, I want you to have a revival. And I thought I was psychologically playing tricks on myself, you know, like, oh, sure.
Did you question, like, did I hear it? Was that actually it? Like, you kind of went into that mode?
Like I'm talking to myself to make me feel better, like I have hope, which I didn't at that time.
Yeah.
And then I would look down at the platform and the stage and I think, what, you want me to be that? And they were doing a great job. So they were beyond me. And so I just put it out of my mind, but sort of like the 3 times going to that group and getting to church, the next night, same thing. I'm sitting there and I hear that and I reject it. I thought, this is crazy. I'm going crazy. Then the third night it happened again. And this time I said, I want you to have a revival. And I'm arguing back just in myself. And he added one line to it. He said, I didn't say you have to be the revival. Now I think I did, but the way he described it in my head was, well, I can serve people if I don't have to be it. If I just have to be like a waiter or something, and just feed people or whatever. Maybe, just maybe. But I didn't feel anything. I had a glimmer of hope. I noticed I was starting to think a little bit after I spent all day in the hotel screaming into my pillow, reading Psalms, listening to worship, and then just crying out to God. And then go to church every single night for 2 weeks. And I started getting a glimmer of hope, but I called Kathy and said, okay, I'll come back home. But if nothing happens, I can't just start over. We're going to do something else. I mean, maybe I'll help keep the church going or something. So that was it. Drove back home, parked in the same parking space, felt nothing. Walked in, I put my hand on the door like it's a push out door. I thought, come on, there's got to be something going on. I felt 0, 0, 0. I opened the door, I look, and there's Kathy. I'm a little ways away. And all the congregation looked at me because it was at that side. And I panicked. What do I do? Oh, go give Kathy a hug. That'll look real good. You've been gone for 2 years. That's what I should do as a husband. So that's what I was going to do. So I walked toward her. I put out my arms, and I'm about 2 feet away from her. And then it happened. I had no warning at all. I can almost not tell you. Sorry. Let me catch my breath.
No, you're good.
So I did that, and suddenly, like a lightning bolt from heaven came down. And the church was full of people. So 150 people saw me change. I was not a jumper, a leaper, fall downer, nothing. And I leaped into the air, and they say I twirled. I have no memory of it, but I don't think I'm a twirler even today, but that's what they say. Okay.
But that day you were, that day.
Yeah, I leaped, I jumped. It was like I was electrocuted. So right on the spot, I didn't quite know this then, but I know now. Right on that spot, I became a different person.
Wow.
And all of my life left me that in the hurt, the dismay. I mean, not just then. I mean, as a child, it just went away. And the only thing I could associate it with was Paul on the road to Damascus, who was on his way to destroy Christians. And what? The persecutor is now a preacher, and how fast did that happen? Yeah. And I could associate with that. And I said, this can happen to people. Maybe not 100% like me, but it can happen. And what did happen then from that night on is, I want to add one other thing. All those years that I talked revival, just like a lot of people talk revival, I was thinking it's such a God thing that if I'm just available, or I just show up at church and say, oh, God, send revival, and do the best I can at it like that. But you know what happened really? The problem with the revival in my life and in my church was I'm the one that wasn't ready.
Wow.
The people followed. It was easy, but I wasn't ready. And I had to go through what I think it was the valley of the shadow of death. And I'm the leader. I'm the one that needed to change and step into a new realm. And when I did, it was easy because I got up during that service and I would try to talk, and it was like I had a stroke or something because I could only spit, and then I couldn't say anything more, and then I'd catch it again. But immediately, just a couple of families. But I didn't lay hands on them. I didn't do anything. And I just reached out, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't even know what this was. And they just looked like somebody had cut them off at their knees. They just went plop. And I go, what is this? And when they got up, they're looking around like something had happened too. It was just one family or two at first. And so that started it. And with this line, I said, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to come tomorrow night and find out. That was it. Yeah. And I thought personally, I showed up, everybody was there. I said the same. We went through the same thing the second night. Next night, everybody was there. So I didn't really say, we're going to have revival. And I never said this is revival. We're going to have services 5 or 6. They just start showing up. So we went Sunday through Wednesday or Thursday, I can't remember now, for 7 weeks. And then we switched. And fortunately, we built a gymnasium. And so we moved services to there. And I made the big decision. I said, people started to come sort of. And I thought, you know what? A lot of people might come if they had their whole weekend. So what if we'd had intercessory prayer Wednesday, and then we'd go Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. At that time, we did 2 on Sunday. But what would happen? Would our own church come? I mean, that means they're going to come Friday, give up their Friday and Saturdays, like everybody used to it. And they did. They laid it out first. All I had to do was show up. And then, of course, people start coming. And then I was on a lot of I got invited to TV shows, and then I don't remember what year
Yeah.
Newsweek and Time came. I can't remember, but I do remember the guy that thought God was finished with him. And then it was an amazing moment. I was in Charles de Gaulle Airport in Paris, and I don't speak French, but so all over the airport, people were looking at Newsweek. And I was trying to think, I could sit down and tell him my story if I could only speak French. The only thing I could think of is from the musical Camelot, they used to sing a song called C'est moi, meaning what's that? It's me, or tis I, I think it means.
So you can start there.
I could start there, but I didn't. I just kept walking. I just kept grinning and said, this is an amazing thing. And it does change your life to be in those things. But go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was Brownsville you were at, right?
Yeah.
In Pensacola. Yeah. So that was kind of like a getaway for you to kind of restart.
I didn't feel like they should pray for me. I mean, people would kind of fight their way to get prayed for by the leaders.
Sure.
And I thought, I'm not worthy to be prayed for. Why pray for me? I mean, it might be a waste. But yes, it was just
God met you there.
The atmosphere. Yeah, it was just a wonderful time for me to soak there.
I think that's super encouraging. And I love stories of revival. About 5 years ago, God kind of called me to start studying revival history, because there's so much out there and so much documented evidence, from the later ones like Brownsville with the actual videos to the newspaper articles to the stories and preachers. I was looking at Evan Roberts the other day, just kind of studying that Welsh revival a little more. But I find it interesting because they're all so different. There's not like this one cookie cutter formula. They're all different. They all start in different ways that most people didn't even expect something to unleash, right? But God had bigger plans. And I love how you were there for 12 years, and that gives me hope. Like, I'm 5 years into this, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why can't we have revival yet? It should be easier. Why are we going to even see it in like my life?
You are talking for thousands of other pastors, including me.
Yeah. Like, am I going to see something like that in my lifetime? That's my question right now to God. Like, if it's not me, then I'll go somewhere to be a part of it. Cause that's my desire, is to like go where the manifest presence of God is so thick that like it will bring me to my face or whoever's around it. And so like, I want to pick up from there, because like when that starts happening, right, and it starts questioning like your whole like mindset of how God can move, and that's usually what happens in these revivals is like, okay, my whole theology is out the window now because God's moving in ways I never saw before, right? So like, what was some of the fruit that you saw from people that are coming from all around, experiencing this thickness, you said, of God's presence? Like, what was that doing for people's hearts and the change that you saw out of people?
Before I do that, I want to mention this, since you're praying and seeking, maybe both of you, about a move of God and the real thing. First of all, that might have been the worst news you could hear when I said the problem was I wasn't ready. We'll just leave it at that.
Mm-hmm.
But sure,
hey, that's often we get in the way. Yeah,
people will follow a lot more than you think if you really give them something. However, I want to say this to correct that. I was going through St. Louis for some reason in 2 years before, and I happened to see that Rodney Howard Brown was at a church there. I didn't know him. I'd heard about kind of a laughing revival guy like other guys did, but I was close, and so we went just to an afternoon meeting. And I just watched, I listened and I watched. I didn't get prayed for. I just was an observer. But when I came out of there in 1984, I think it was, I came out of there and I said, Kathy, I think it's starting. Something is starting. So we went back to our church and added a Tuesday night prayer meeting just for revival. We're not going to pray for missionaries. I'm not going to pray for your sore toe. We're going to pray for the glory. And they didn't know how to pray. I would say, let's pray for revival. Let's pray for the pastors. And like, they'd last like 15 seconds and then it all stopped, because we're trying to do corporate, like not just individual. Let's do it together, corporate. Let's worship and we'll cry out together. And so I got the piano and I'd sing a song and say, now let's try praying for 1 minute. Cause we're in training. It's okay. But over that, well, the point being is, what I learned from that is when it happened, as you're talking about the fruit of it, a lot of pastors would come and get these tremendous things happen, especially when they'd stay Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Those days were kind of like me down in Brownsville. Mm-hmm. But they would go back to their churches and say, okay, it happened to me. We're going to have revival. And they'd have it. And some of them would go 7 days a week, and after 3, 4, 5, at the most, maybe 6 weeks, it quits and the people are worn out and they can't believe, how do you do this? Okay, here's what I'd like to say. Before Jesus started his revival, if I can call it that, John the Baptist came and they said, who are you? He says, I am a voice and I am here to prepare the way of the Lord. We
Yeah.
spent 2 years every Tuesday night from 7 to sometimes 9, 9:30 or longer, only praying for a move. Other ways to word it, glory of God, presence of
Yeah.
God, revival,
Sure. Yeah.
whatever. But and emptying ourselves and learning how to flow and getting unified. So with that in mind, when I walked in that door, left out something. An interesting thing happened. I'm the only one it didn't happen to. All of the congregation kicked off their shoes and ran to the front.
Mm.
Like they had been studying and praying while I was gone, that like, if
Mhm.
God does something, this is holy ground. Well, I didn't know that they'd been studying, so I'm the only one with my shoes on. So that's the point leading up to it. Now, the fruit of it is still there today. I have people all over the world still stay in contact. And the nice thing about it is, I know this is true, that a lot of people got touches from a lot of different places, but for some reason, they kind of drifted away and could use another one. I'm sure that's happened to people that came, but there's a large amount of people and a number of churches around the world that still, they went back and took advice and started molding their congregations towards it. And then they invited me to come when they had prepared a little bit. And then things would happen and strike. And they're still they're still altered congregations today that are more lively, intense. They're not perfect people. I like to say, remember, revival it doesn't make you perfect. It makes you different.
Mm.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you still got to deal with, things, but there's lasting fruit. I still get people in Singapore, pastors stay in touch with me still, and they still come.
Yeah.
People from all over the world still come and visit me, and they'll say,
Awesome.
I remember when I was there. And then when we moved to Kansas City, we had to set up a tent because we didn't have a place to go, which is another story. When God said, you need to move, we'd outgrown the city, the town of Smithton. And I asked God, well, God, if I go to Kansas City, what guarantee do I have that this is going to keep going? And he said, I'm not going to give you a guarantee it'll keep going. I'll do this, though. I'll guarantee it's going to stop if you don't go. So I left, and Kathy's folks lived here, which was helpful. And by the way, in 2008, you mentioned the Kansas City revival. That was a total shock to me. It was a night I got up and just started ministering, and we had great worship anyway. I mean, still had some roots of revival. It probably was more revival-ish, but now we got 8 years, because when 9/11 happened, it stopped.
Mm.
Everybody quit traveling. And so we turned into kind of a local church for 8 years.
Yeah.
Another 8 years went by.
Yeah.
Right.
And when it struck, then it struck a little differently, because just surprise just happened. And we still didn't quite know if anything had happened, but we'd come back on Sunday and there's just this thickness was growing and growing.
Yeah.
Young people and children, teenagers were a big part of the early part of praying for people. And it just so happened that I met a new friend who was I'd say he's the executive at Daystar back then. And he just happened to come. They took some little 3-minute footage of prayer time. And then they had me on Daystar as a guest, not for the revival, for a little book I wrote called My Absurd Religion. We can talk about that another time. But so they did an interview. And at the end of the broadcast, they had 3 or 4 minutes left. And they said, hey, why don't we show that video? So they showed the video. And at the end of it, he said, I'm going to send a satellite truck to your church. And just a month-to-month basis. And we're going to air your service live. And I thought, live? I know it's always videotaped. Live for 90 minutes every Friday night, and revival again. And so now, out of settling as a kind of a regular church, we added Saturday night service back for the same reasons. Now we got church Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. No Sunday night, just 4 services a week. That went on for another 3.5 years. And everybody came, and the crowds were much bigger than in the country. The difference is being on TV, we still got a lot of press, but people could just turn on their TV and watch us. So the mystery wasn't like, what do you think's going on there? You watch it, you either like it or you don't like it.
Sure.
But now I'm getting invitations. They were in 200 countries all over the world again. So we mostly touched other places. But we did that for 3.5 years again. And one pastor cornered me. He said, you turkey. I said, what are you talking about? He said, I've been praying for revival at my church and nothing has happened. And you got to have it twice. So, but it's a lot of work.
It
A
is,
lot of
yeah.
dedication. I read, I think, dedication, focusing, whether it be revival or family or relationships or just prayer, whatever. I believe you're encouraging priority focus.
Yeah.
And so we did it. And a lot of the same people that were in Smithton helped me run this. They came with us to Kansas City.
Well,
so that's the other side of the story.
yeah. Well, I love how you
Yeah.
cast a vision for it. Yeah, God showed up in a moment maybe you weren't expecting. I call it like preparing a runway, right, for God to land. Like we have to prepare our hearts, we have to prepare our people. And you cast a vision even in the small town you were in of like, what would it look like if lines were out the door? And that kind of gets people's minds thinking, how can we prepare for that? And Drew, go ahead. I know you have a burning question about this.
Well, first of all, there's a lot that you mentioned that's really encouraging and also just piques my awareness and curiosity a little bit. One, having the story at the beginning of saying no to what you were about to step into. I love that because I did the same thing.
Oh,
And like I got to this point where I was done with, I'd been in ministry for a while. I decided to be done with it. Started doing real estate and things like that. Had a church call me, and then I was like, "Yep, nope, it's not going to happen." And then they're like, "No, really, we'd love for you." And nope, not going to do it. And eventually, God, got me to that place. Then you went into talking about preparing the way for the Lord. And Tim, I think this is a real encouragement to you because you're the one that asked really the question about like, well, how does revival happen? Like I see from a distance, I feel like Tim is that guy at his church. Like I think Steve, if you got to know Tim more, you'd recognize, man, at his church, he's the one that's really preparing and asking the questions like, hey, what if we were doing some things like this at the church? Like, what if we saw this happen? What would it look like for us to start building and preparing as if this could happen? What would that look like? And I've just seen the staff and the church start to respond to that. So I do feel like Tim is one of those guys. And then there at the end, you kind of threw in the book, right? My Absurd Religion. And, one of the things we noticed about the book is that there was a question asked, is God even attending our churches? Now, you mentioned revival. You mentioned pastors who were like, well, you got to do it twice. And I didn't even get to do it. And, and Tim and I are here like, we want to experience it too. We got to prepare the way. Dive into that question a little bit like you did in the book. What are you seeing with different churches, the combination and really the competition of, is this a religious performance? Is it an obligation? Am I really being who I need to be? Like dive into that a little bit and give us some clarity on just the landscape that you're seeing across churches right now.
I have I'm not trying to sell, but on stevegrayministries.com, I have this little book called
If You Only Knew.
Yeah, If You Only Knew, a guide for the clueless generation. Now that's just months ago. I was invited to speak to a Republican breakfast and it was my first time down in Florida. And I thought, how can I do this? So I wrote 5 chapters as fast as I could and gave it away and made it quickly and gave it away to anybody there that wanted it. And the interesting thing, as we'll get on that thing, you open the book and you start reading, America is sick. It is sick unto death. Opportunists cash in on our symptoms. Revivalists bring healing. I am a revivalist. But okay, so with that in mind, we have, with the changes happening in government, is positive. And I like it. I like the adventure of whatever, getting up every day and seeing what are they going to do next. But I think that the church has to be careful because where we are is because I think it'd be real easy now to put our arms back down now and stop praying and say, now we're okay.
Right.
But we're not okay because even though we've had a new election, we still had, cars driving into a parade and killing people. We still had, I think it was a school shooting. We had our president shot at, So all these symptoms are still there in the hearts of the people. Great, terrible division. So my stance now is to try to help bring the church to fulfilling its job of being spiritual. I know that sounds like what? Of course, but we're not. We're not. Right. Are we really walking by the Spirit? And so we need that. The political is changing. If we could get the spiritual to be as active now as the political, we could change the hearts of people. And when they ask me, like, how come you don't preach against abortion more and the things that a lot of preachers do? I said, okay, I get it. It's just not my niche really, but I don't like abortion. But the way I change abortion is getting someone touched by the Spirit of God. I've never had somebody really touched by God. They get saved, filled, they speak in tongues, they glorify God or whatever. they don't go have abortions. They change their minds. And that's how we change minds. And so we need the spiritual. Last week I was read the Barna report or whatever. I don't get it, but my wife does. And he worded it so well. I don't remember how, but he was describing what he sees in churches today, certain groups leaving, but he put it where I think it belongs. He put it into the leadership. He said, it's the type of sermons that are being preached today. And it's the church is turned into a place to go get your feelings checked or
There it is.
repaired,
Yeah.
or to make you feel better
Yeah.
about yourself,
Right.
rather than like I did. I didn't feel good about. I wanted to become another person anyway. I really did, but instead of feeling good about myself, I had to realize I can be changed. Instead of feeling better of who I am, I go in and I get changed who I am. And the whole thing of the kingdom of God is God comes down and we get transformed.
Yeah.
Whatever
think-
level, and it could be
Yeah.
transformations through life. It might be one time, 10 times.
Sure. It's encouraging for all of us because we're all a work in progress. And I know you as a pastor, you're saying like, I was a different person, right? And I know we can all speak to areas of our life where we had like, it's almost like layers falling off, right?
Yeah.
God doesn't do it all at once because I guess it would be like too dramatic, too drastic, right? But like, here's something I want you to work on. Let's work on this layer and then I'll take you to the next layer. And that's the whole process of sanctification. And I think it's encouraging that just because you've attended church your whole life, or even if you're in ministry or even a pastor, like God's not done with you, but you need your heart. You need your heart willing to say like, God, I want more of you. And once you ask that and put yourself in vulnerable positions, he shows up because he knows that he can work with something instead of just like, I'm good. I go to church once a month and 1 hour, and then I have my check mark to go to heaven. So
I think pastors can become enablers, and not on purpose. There's a lot of great men and women out there preaching that are preaching what I don't think they should necessarily be preaching, but they're not bad people. They're not doing it on purpose. It's only what they were taught. You can only teach what you know. And so they feel like, well, if we're loving people, I feel for you, man. You know, if I feel for them and I talk about their feelings and I'm sorry you feel that way, let me help you get better. There's nothing wrong with that. I get it. I understand it. But then like the title, My Absurd Religion, by which I make me live, is kind of a slap. Like, what is this? I have to say, you know what? God really doesn't care about your feelings. So I don't necessarily have to either. I do, but that's not my calling. God cares if you walk by the Spirit.
Right.
And a lot of times we stop too early, like the story in the Bible of the two blind men. They Jesus, have mercy on us. And he goes up to him. He says, what do you want me to do? He said, well, I want to see. I want my sight. Okay. So he prays for him and lays hands on him, whatever he does, and they can see. They get healed. And we go, there we go. That's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's get some people healed. Let's get it delivered. That's not what happened.
Right.
You know what happened? So those two men got what they wanted, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And Jesus got what he wanted, because then they turned, because now they can see, and they started using their sight. They turned and followed Jesus.
That's
And
good.
so many of the times our end result, we just want to get people to feel better or get healed or not sick anymore, which is good. But are we making real followers? These were real followers. They used the sight given to them to follow Jesus. If they were blind, they wouldn't be able to follow. I like to say that they got what they wanted, but Jesus got what he wanted. And that's my goal, is that Jesus gets what he wants also, and not just only, but also.
Yes.
And so I'm trying to focus, and in a way, real moves of God are not that difficult. It's difficult in the simple reason, they ask me, why are we not having revival at our church? No, I'm not. It's oversimplifying it, but it's easy to say. You know why? Because you don't want it. If that's all you want, you'll get it. If that's all you want, really, truly, and that doesn't mean you can't go have your kids in soccer or something like that, but it's the focus of our life. The focus of my life is walking with Jesus. The focus of my life is not making money. I'm not against making money. I'd like to have more because I could do more, but that's not my focus. All I want, I like to take a walk with Jesus every day and not just pray. My prayers are different too. They change too, because, most people, they start praying and immediately they start asking for things. And I know they have needs, and God knows we have need of them. Right. But the Bible also says that God knows your need before you ask.
Right.
Okay. Well, I got to ask. Can we just not stop beating around the bush here. You already know. Just let's do this. Let's
Right.
get this. But it's because it's the ask, or
Relationship.
it's the talk. Yeah, it's the talk.
Yeah.
So I spend almost, sometimes I get up most nights in the middle of the night, like 2 to 3 or 4, whatever, and I pray. But I spend almost the whole time just talking about him, talking about how do I get to know you better? Do I know you well enough? What is there anything I could do? Imagine everybody else's feelings are so wrecked, and I go like, you know what, Jesus, I care how you feel. I want to make you feel better because you have blessed me. You've blessed me, and so I spend a lot of time. Then at the end, I'll tag on maybe somebody's need or somebody's in the hospital or whatever. But my prayer is not asking for stuff or whatever. My prayer is asking for him more and more and
That's
more.
good.
Yeah, and it goes into preparation, right? Like one of the things that while you were going through that, I'm like, okay, I'm thinking through some conversations I've had recently with some other pastors, and a couple weeks ago had a conversation with one pastor that was telling me how busy his week is,
Yes.
and he goes, and you know how it is, man. Like you're super busy. Our church is in the middle of an upfit right now. At the same time we're doing an upfit, there's this thing called Easter coming, and all these things. And so we're doing all this stuff. And he's like, you know how it is, man. You're really busy. And I was like, I mean, I'm not like, I wouldn't say I'm busy. I like the idea that I'm focused, but I don't know that I'm busy. I mean, I'm having lunch with you at 12 in the afternoon. How busy could I really be? Right. So he was telling me over and over and again, like, this is what I'm doing on Thursday. This is what I'm doing on Friday. And I'm just like, hey, when are you like preparing for the Spirit to arrive in your building? When are you planning on the move of God to start moving through your congregation? Like, when is your preparation for that? Because I see so many meetings on your calendar and I see so many things on your calendar, and that's great. I love that you're like devoted here and you're consistent, and that's awesome. But I mean, dude, you gotta be in his presence. And if you need to build that into your calendar, build it into your calendar, but that's got to be your number one priority. And what I hear you saying and just thinking through your timeline of like, man, this is where I was for 12 years. And even though that was a dark space, look at the preparation that was happening. And then I had to go through, like you described, this valley, right? The valley of the shadow of death. Here I am. And it's like, yeah, but look at the preparation that was happening. You got to a place where when you came back, all you wanted was to be changed. It was like, once the leader took on that, look at what happened in the congregation. And then you're talking to other pastors. You're like, yeah, what are you really doing? What do you really want? Because if all you want is Jesus, then roll and go with that, and you're going to get to where you need to get to. So I think that's an encouragement for all of us, our listeners, whether you're in ministry or not. I think we want a lot of things. We want a better marriage. We want a better family. We want a better job. We want a better financial situation. We want a better relationship. We want a better everything, right? Like we always have these asks, these wants, but how much are we really preparing to know Jesus better, experience the Spirit more? Like how are we preparing ourselves? So that, to me, a great lesson for our listeners during the week. Are you just praying when you have free time? Are you just getting in the Word when you have a moment? Are you building little segments into your schedule, or are you really structuring your week and your day going, I know that I'm going to spend time with God? How is everything else going to fit into that?
Yeah, I also, just me personally, and by the way, I want to say, you don't have to have church 4 and 5 times a week to be a revival.
Right.
There's an advantage to it because the longer you're day after day, it changes you more than other people are changed because you get that consistency. You don't have to. The number one question that was disappointing to me that reporters ask me, Christian reporters, I always wanted that, what was the glory of God like? Because we had a lot of things happen, but what was this like? And what the glory, and what did it feel like? And that's not what they asked me. The first thing they'd say is, hey, do we have to go to church 5 days a week to have revival? If that's your first question, then
you missed it.
Yeah, I know you missed. You're
you
missing
missed it.
Because
how about
the
7
glory
days?
comes first, and then you go 5 times a week. So whatever. But but anyway, yes. Even my church now, we're after, I call it post-pandemic, things changed. We lost some people that I don't know where they went because we couldn't have church. A lot of people watched home. They still watch from home. Our home audience is bigger, I guess, congregation. But we lost people. Our congregation shrunk down. And I saw some video clips the other day. Somebody was showing me something. And I'm looking, wow, I forgot we had such a big crowd, but it went down. But new people are coming and they're different. A lot of them don't know anything. Well, then I've got the crew that was in the 2008 Move of God or Smithton or whether still go to our church. And, they're just like, come on, we need revival. We need revival. But if it would strike, in my opinion, if I get too forward with it and push it or try, those people that are new converts, really new, we baptized 90 people like a month ago, 2 months ago, whatever.
Wow.
Well, they won't last. They're still, just like you said, they're still trying to figure out how to be married. They're still trying to pay their bills and get out of debt, all the regular stuff. So I'm laying groundwork again and not in too big a hurry. I do feel in our church, just in the last 2 months, I feel an upsurge. I hope you guys do too. And if you don't, and not just you guys, but everybody listening, I hope you feel it. Grab hold of it, press a little harder. Back then, because we were a small church, some people didn't believe it. The bigger churches, they believed it. So it was too hard to figure what. But now, all these many years later, the story of the big churches is not as impressive because there's a lot of big churches. And people are gathering this, what? This is almost the impossibility of God. And small churches, medium churches everywhere can be encouraged now that you don't have to be the super mega church. And you can host this thing.
Yeah.
And you get your people are going to have to be involved, though, because they're going to have to help you host it. And so as a pastor, then I want to still prepare the way of the Lord. I'm not a guy going around saying, God told me. I'm very slow to speak. And I won't give advice unless you ask it, I don't think. But I was preaching, and 3 times I had what I described as knowing appearance of Jesus, but not an appearance that anybody else could see. It was a close-of knowing. I don't know how else to say it. But it was not the glorified Jesus today who we got to remember. His eyes are blazing like fire. Okay. Mm-hmm. This was for me. I'm preaching on TV live. And over here to my left was a figure that an outline of a figure that only I could see and notice and feel. Okay. That's the best I can do. But the interesting thing about it was I knew that I was getting some kind of guidance from Jesus, because here was this, and you just know stuff sometimes, like, they didn't know it was Jesus, and all of a sudden they opened their eyes in the Bible on the road to Emmaus. Hey, there he is. So just all of a sudden I'm preaching and I'm distracted, a little nervous, but this figure was very, very interesting, and it did 3 times. But anyway, this Jesus that I saw was the Jesus more like when he walked the earth, but he stood there and he wasn't taller than me. He had his hands folded in front of him. His shoulders were down and his head was down like this. And he just stood there. And it totally changed me. 3 times I had it totally changed me, because I looked at him and 2 things. First of all, I thought, you are so simple and pure. How could they crucify you? How? And then I thought, I am too tall on the inside. And I am way too complicated. I felt I'm preaching away, and I feel like, you're so focused. You're so simple. And you know what I mean? So eyes, exactly. And you're humble. And I said, I am way too complicated. Wow. And I am way too tall. I stand too tall on the inside. What it changed me was, and I teach it now, but what it changed me is I was preaching a lot of sermons, 4 a week or whatever, or more when I traveled. And before, you could get ready to big crowds, and you get ready, you would kind of like, you got to get your head together and get your story. I can do this. And what am I preaching about? And I hope I get out there and do it right. All those things. And after that, I went totally the other direction. Before I go out and in prayer and in sermon preparation, I worked to make myself smaller. Go out and be small now. Be small. Let him be the big guy. Get smaller. I mean, John the Baptist said, I have to decrease. And so I tell some students or Bible students and stuff that want to preach, or even people in our church want to preach, and they get so nervous, like, I don't know what to preach. You've preached everything. And I said, stop for a minute here. It doesn't matter what you preach, really. What we need is to hear you say what we know. I've heard it, but I've never heard you say it. So spend some time preparing you, not just your outline.
That's great.
And it's just life-changing to me. That's why I like visiting with guys that allow me to talk, because these life-changing things can change other lives. And we're so individualistic in our culture that I hear a lot about churches praying for revival and all that, but very few of them ask advice. You know, they're half my age trying to do what I did. And actually, the reason I wrote this book was a publisher came to me and said, would you please write a book? And by the way, I wrote it with my son-in-law too. We came together. A publisher said, would you write a book together? And this is what he said to me. He said, you got to write a book. I said, why? He says, you're one of the few men left alive on the face of the earth that has seen these every day, day after day after day, for years, move of God. And I never thought of myself that way. So
hard to find people, that have been through it.
When I was doing the revivals and they asked me, I never preached the same sermon. Now, over the years, I would preach the same passage, but I never did the same sermon because my own congregation was there and they needed ministry too. And then the visitors. So every day was a routine. You get up and do it. You don't get to bed early because the services, I'd still be at church sometimes at 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning sometimes. And so then you get back and you eat something. So then you sleep in a little bit. But once I'm going, get some business taken care of, then I spent every afternoon just locked up in my room. That's it. No phone calls, nobody, don't bother me. And get it. And I come get a sermon every day. And then that's how I did it. Yeah. And so that's a cost, but it's a one cost. It's a good one. So,
well, you have two guys here that have questions that might reach out to you separately. And so I appreciate your wisdom. We're at the end of our time, but we could do a whole nother episode on your book on Gideon, Mighty Like Gideon. I love his story. He has so many good lessons from the life of Gideon. So Pastor Steve, if you just want to close us on, about your book real quick and where people can connect with you, that'd be great.
Yeah. They can go to stevegrayministries.com and you can get it in bookstores, but we also have this workbook and you can get it for $1. And the book you buy and then you get that for $1, and it's a really good workbook. So that's that part. But I encourage people to learn and grow, break out of individualism and let's get together and talk and understand that in my opinion, actually revival can happen anywhere on the face of the earth at any time. But we've already talked about, but it's not just going to fall out of the sky. And you've studied it enough. We don't want to have a revival that says it has to be that way or it was like that. But they all have some things in common. They were all praying people and repented people, right? And if you read the stories, they said, we want revival. Well, have you forgiven everybody?
That's a big one. Yeah.
It's got to be like zero. You have to have zero unforgiveness. Zero. Well, that's scriptural. But are you willing to go there? So there are things that we can do to increase the likeliability of having revival. And I love your example of some place to land, because people think it just comes into the air, but the Holy Spirit got to land on somebody. Is it you? Well, you're already putting in the work, I know, and you're putting in the time and your mind and your heart, and talking like this just makes it even grow more, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So, absolutely.
I was just going to say about the book, the reason I liked Gideon, one of the sermons I preached was the river test is what it was called. And I realized one of the problems is we think revival or anything with God comes because we show up at church, or in other words, we show up at the river. And so I preached on it. No, it's not who showed up to drink. It's how they drank that made them chosen. You get chosen by how you drink. So be careful. When you show up at church, you make it the most valuable hour or whatever. Make it the most important time of the week, because God looks how you drink. And he said, pick those that drink a certain way. And other people, they just drink like they always drank, nominal like that. And I like Gideon because I can associate with him saying, I'm the least and I'm the weakest. Why would you even be talking to me? That's me. And I know a lot of people, but he still got picked. And God said, go in the strength, not that I'm giving you, go in the strength that you have. All he had to do was, he didn't have to go throw a spear and take a sword.
Right.
All he had to do was be able to break a jar and shout and wave a torch or whatever. And the biggest thing that he had to go, though, the biggest thing he says, called him a mighty man of valor. He had to go take on his father's religion. That's harder than taking on the Midianites, I think. getting
Yeah.
that old time, that I don't want to say old time religion. That's
Destroy the idols.
critical, but just what's in you. Because how many people come to your churches and say, well, I didn't grow up like this. All
Yeah.
right, story's over.
Yeah.
So you're retired. And so there's just so many elements in there.
I'll put a link to that in the show notes. Drew, close us out.
Yeah. And again, thanks for being here, Steve, and all the stories, all the advice as well. And like Tim said, we'll definitely be reaching out to you. If you've been listening to this and you're like, man, this is really, really good. This would help somebody. It certainly helped me. Make sure you share and like the podcast. Go ahead and write a review as well. You can also email us at eyesonjesuspodcast@outlook.com to let us know your thoughts, and let us know maybe your thoughts, not just on the podcast, but also where have you seen revival pop up in your life? What is something that you're praying for? How are you preparing yourself for revival? And then don't forget to connect with us on all of our social media accounts, especially our Eyes on Jesus podcast community on Facebook. So until next time, go with God, grow in discernment, and keep your eyes on Jesus.
Thanks for joining us on the Eyes on Jesus podcast with Drew and Tim. Don't forget to hit subscribe